Hey, welcome back to Business 101, Introduction to Business. And in this module, we are continuing our journey as we look at information technology in business. And as you can see from this slide, what we're looking at in this video number 3 are the building blocks of information technology. Now, there are always a few folks in a lecture like this, in a class like this, who have a deep experience and understanding in information technology. Perhaps you've been playing with computers and networking for a little while now in your life and career. And for many of us, however, we don't have that level of experience. And so a lecture like this is very, very helpful to start at the very beginning at a baseline so we all build the same foundation moving forward to understand a little bit about how all this technology works. We start out then with the distinction that generally speaking, there are two broad categories of components when we talk about information technology, and those two categories are hardware and software. We define hardware as the physical components of a computer network, such as keyboards, monitors, central processing units, printers, modems, routers, speakers, scanners, all the kinds of things that, some examples at least, you see in the picture to the right. Any physical component that is part of the system is a necessary consideration in information technology. It is the hardware, in essence, that is the backbone for everything that IT is able to do. Now, in the earliest days, of course, the hardware lived in the office. It lived in the building, and that's no longer true. The first migration, of course, which we may not have thought of much, but the very earliest migration was the migration of hardware from the office to the home. When people began to work with computers, not just in a server room or at their office desk, but they were actually able to have a computing device in their home office, and then more and more so in portable formats like smartphones and those kinds of devices. But hardware in and of itself isn't enough. We also need software. Software, as you see here, defined as the programs that tell the computer how to function, what resources to use, how to use them, and application programs for specific activities. So you sort of see from the diagram on the far right the way that this all works. There is the computing hardware that we talked about in the previous slide, whether that's a large server or a desktop computer, a laptop, a tablet, a smartphone, some form of hardware, which then uses a type of software known as an operating system just to turn on and have certain functions available. From there, we use specific application software that sits on top of and works with the operating system to do things like, well, to open, send, and read email, to browse the World Wide Web, to connect to Zoom, to do all those kinds of things. Those are all examples of application software which sits on top of the operating system, which runs the hardware, all so that you as the user at the top of the diagram are able to accomplish what you want to accomplish. But things really don't get interesting until you take that computer and you connect it to another computer. This what is in the most basic form known as computer networking. You see the definition there. A computer network is a group of two or more computers linked together by some sort of connection technology, whether it's physical cabling or by wireless technology or broadband persistent connections, whatever it is, some sort of connection that links two or more computing devices together so that they can share data and share resources and interact with each other and perhaps spit out output onto a printer or a similar device. And so what we typically see these days, networking has developed over the last several decades to the predominance of the client-server network. And you see there the definition of a client-server network. It is a business network in which client computers, make requests for information or resources or processing, and servers provide the services. typically in this architecture, as you see in the diagram below, you have a whole host of client computing devices, and those may be smartphones or desktops or another network, and they are communicating with the centralized servers. You see there 3 server devices in a circle there in that diagram, right? The servers do all of the heavy lifting, provide all of the calculation and processing power, they house all the data, and then they simply serve up the requested results to the individual client computers. That is essentially the most basic way to describe typical networking architecture these days as a client-server network. Now, we see that today. For instance, the last time you bought a textbook online, your computing device, whether it was a laptop computer, your desktop at home, a school library computer, your smartphone, your iPad, was acting as a client device to connect over the web through your connection to a server device, which was either hosted perhaps by the school bookstore or by Amazon Web Services or a cloud computing company. And that server device communicated with the seller of the textbook, with the delivery service, and served up the requested services to you in order for you to complete the transaction for you to purchase your textbook. That then is, of course, a classic and practical example of a client-server network. The largest client-server network that we have today, we know as the Internet. The definition there, the gigantic system of interconnected computer networks linked together by voice, electronic, and wireless technologies. Now, the Internet exists in several different forms. One form we know of is the World Wide Web. You should know, however, there are other forms of connection that we know of as parts of the Internet, including, for instance, email connectivity, which is powered by the Internet but is not part of the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web, you see the definition there, the branch of the Internet consisting of interlinked hypertext documents or web pages. Now, if you think about it, a web page is essentially a text document with some interesting capabilities, right? With links and the ability to click on a link and then link to another document, another web page. But in essence, what is a web page? It's a document with all sorts of rich and varied content on it. Now, the way that a web page works is uses interlinked hypertext. And the protocol or the language or the agreed upon standard that these pages communicate with one another is known as hypertext transfer protocol. You can see the definition there. The communications protocol used for the World Wide Web, in which related pieces of information on separate web pages are connected together using what we call hyperlinks. And so you can sort of see just by the graphic example I've included at the top of the page, when you type in a web page, you want to say visit Amazon.com to purchase textbooks or cooking utensils or a pair of shoes or whatever it is that you want to buy from Amazon. The actual address you're entering into your web browser looks like the above example, http://www.amazon.com. And that address means HTTP is an acronym for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. The colon and the 2 slashes are part of the syntax. And then www is shorthand for the World Wide Web, and that is, of course, part of the protocol for your browser to reach that particular page on the Internet, Amazon.com's homepage. Perhaps you already knew that, or perhaps this is a brand new explanation, but you should know that essentially when we talk about the World Wide Web, we're talking about millions upon millions of pages which contain hypertext links to rich content, whether it's additional pages or additional text or pictures and images or videos or whatever kind of content it is, all of these things linked together in a web, the World Wide Web, strung together based upon the protocol or the language of hypertext transfer protocol. Now, that's not all that we use internet communication for. We also have what we typically call a company's intranet, which you see there defined as an organization's private network of internally linked websites that are accessible only to their employees. Most organizations these days have an intranet of sorts. College of Marin, for instance, has an intranet, and that intranet is the platform for employees and staff and administrators to put employee-only documents, information, links, resources, forms, data, reporting, so that only authorized employees are able to access the correct set of documents and information for their internal use. Another use of intranet communication is what we call an extranet. And you see there an extranet defined as the system that allows outsiders limited access to a firm's internal information network. And you sort of see in the diagram how that sits. An intranet sits entirely within your business, whereas the extranet has a portion which is exposed to the outside world for authorized outside users to access internal information. Let's give you a couple examples of that. One of the world's largest retailers, Walmart, maintains an extranet so that large vendors who sell their products at Walmart, for instance, Procter & Gamble, who sells Crest toothpaste through Walmart, they have a portal as part of Walmart's extranet so that at any time during the day, Procter & Gamble can find out how many thousands of tubes of Crest toothpaste have been sold, and therefore, how many tubes of Crest toothpaste do they need to reship to Walmart to keep their store shelves stocked. That's one example of an extranet. Here's another example of an extranet. When you go on to, say, Amazon.com or BestBuy.com and you select some sort of a thing that you want to purchase, and then it says, whoa, wait a minute, these are out of stock, or there are only 3 of these items left remaining, you better hurry up and put it in your shopping cart now. That is a customer's peek into the vendor's extranet, because it allows you limited and filtered access to their current inventory count. That is also an example of an extranet. And finally, an example of sort of the building blocks of the internet as a means of communication. You see here the example of electronic conferencing. Information technology that allows groups of people to communicate simultaneously from various locations via email, phone, or video. And you can see there are some examples, some company logos and applications I've given you of information technology that allows electronic conferencing, whether that's Zoom, the typical way that College of Marin uses for live online meetings, or FaceTime, or Polycom, or Skype, or Google Hangouts, or you see there's many, many different ways, different brands and different technologies that exist to accomplish much the same thing, right? They're competitors that allow people in real time to have synchronized communication over the intranet. This then is at least a survey, or at least a baseline primer in information technology building blocks. It starts with hardware. It needs software to maintain, use, and apply the hardware. And software typically takes the form of a layer of operating system with application software installed on top of the operating system to interact with the OS and therefore with the hardware to accomplish all these many varied activities that we've talked about in the prior slides of this video. I hope that helps some to bring us up to at least a baseline understanding how IT works, the basic building blocks. Hope that helps. We'll see you in the next lecture.